What's going on, guys? I'm Dan Newton and this is Behind the Chalkboard. In today's world, education establishments are run just like businesses, and I've made it my mission to meet the people behind the scenes and dig deep into what it really takes to make a successful education business. If you think you'd be a good guest, drop me an email at dn@charlesgarth.com. Enjoy the episode. Tracey, thank you for joining us on Behind the Chalkboard.
Thank you for having me.
Lovely to have you. Obviously, with this podcast being created because we want to dip into the world of education and find out what really goes on behind the world of education. You know, we've got yourselves and CEOs and CFOs that do a lot of work behind the scenes. So yeah, my job really to go digging into that. But as always with the podcast, can we start with an introduction? Who you are and who you work for?
Okay, so I'm Tracey Field. I am the Estates Manager for Bishop Chadwick Catholic Education Trust. So a trust of 30 schools in the North East, covering Sunderland, South Tyneside and East Durham. What else can I say about me? I've been there about 3.5 years now. Yeah. It was a new role when I started. It's a tough role. Yeah. With that many schools. Yeah. And we grew really quickly. So we started off with 9 when I joined, and within the first year we were then up to the 30. So massive growth. Really.
How long have you been there for?
3.5 years.
3.5 years now.
Yeah.
So were you doing education before this?
No, so I was actually working in Lagos in Nigeria before this. Okay. So working for an offshore logistics base, basically led a team to develop an island for logistics, so warehousing, roads, networks put in, offices. Yeah, so
onto an island.
Yeah.
There's nothing on there.
There's no. So the company that I worked for bought this piece of land, this island.
Yeah.
And then wanted to have links with the oil and gas industry, so they had to develop it. So I worked with them to develop the master plan of what this island would look like, and then set about leading a team to do that.
That's really interesting. Do you know what's really weird about that? This morning I was Googling, no joke, like just random islands in the middle of the Atlantic, and there's loads of them just scattered about. They're all owned by different countries, and the one I found was by the United States, and it was called like Johnson's Island, and there was literally on there was a runway and just plants. Yeah. So it's
used for something.
So you then find that, and then you put an infrastructure in it.
That's it. So I mean, I didn't find that the company had already had the island, if you like. So I used to live onshore, and every day I would get the ferry, although it wasn't a ferry, a little boat from the mainland to the island. And work there. So we had our offices there, like sort of modular unit offices there. We had a quay, 200-foot quay, 200-metre quay. And then we had road networking, power plant went in, we done warehousing. So we serviced companies like Shell, Samsung, and Total. And then any supply, so they would keep their pipe work and supplies there. So if there was a breakdown on an offshore rig, then they would release it from the base where I was at and then take it offshore. Yeah.
This is really interesting. No? This is so strange.
Not even education.
So strange though that I was literally Googling this morning random island. Because I was thought, what can you do on them? And
well, there you go. So we had a helipad on it as well. So that was one of my first jobs actually, was the helipad on there. So yeah.
So why education? Like that's a big shift. Let's just go there a minute. How do you go from that into then thinking I want to get involved with schools?
Well, I mean, I think the education bit probably just come by the role that I applied for. That is what it was. It was an estates manager role that I liked the look of. So I've worked in many industries, in companies beforehand. So I've worked in overseas. I've worked in the Falklands. So I worked for MOD there on the base there for all the military. So I worked there, but I've also worked, the royal household, so historic buildings. I've worked local authority, so commercial buildings, residential. So I've had a real mix of property, always property and managing them, whether that's the facilities side, or the project side. And so when I saw the job, I actually thought this, it almost brings everything together and then in education, buildings they're not historic as in heritage, but they are old. So maybe it ties in with that. But yeah, so it just looks like an interesting role. And it was a brand new role as well. So something that I could, develop, get my teeth into, set up the processes, procedures and get things running and almost putting my name on it of what I wanted it to look like based on the experience that I've got.
Yeah. So the trust is based up in the northeast.
It is, yeah.
You've got an accent which is quite southern.
It is.
So you live up in the north?
I do. So I live in County Durham. I've lived here about 4.5 years now.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm an Essex girl originally. Yeah.
Right,
so
okay.
Not lost the Essex twang just yet.
So you came back doing the job from Nigeria, back to the UK, into County Durham.
Yep.
The job came up at Bishop Chadwick.
Yeah, well, I applied for the job while I was actually in Lagos. Once I moved up to the northeast, I loved it so much, decided I wanted to settle there.
Right, okay.
So decided to stop working overseas and have a base in the UK. So so I applied for that. So my interview was while I was on the base,
right,
online. So just done it from there. So so I came back, and then in January 21, I started at Bishop Chadwick.
As the head of estates?
The estates manager,
Right.
Yeah.
And how many schools was there?
So I think there was 9 when I joined.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 9 schools, and the job is to just keep the buildings maintained.
Keep them safe, operational. As I say to my CEO all the time, is to keep him out of prison, and make sure that our head teachers are in the same. Obviously, making sure they comply with statutory compliance. Safe. Fit for purpose, and just good educational settings for our young people.
Yeah. So the journey with 9 then, was that not easy, but you obviously built a system quite quickly.
So it was really hard actually, because the 9 that were already in, there really weren't any central processes from my side, from the estate side in place. So and then the others joining in, we had a lot of due diligence around the schools. Other than the education due diligence, is also around what the building condition was like. So we had surveys done on what they were like. My own experience of assessing them, just to know what we were taking on and the risk that came with those and the work that need to be done. But obviously schools all done their own thing. So some had contracts with South Tyneside, some had contracts with Joe Blogg's builders. So it was really difficult for everyone doing things independently to then try and bring people in centrally, so that we have a little bit more, I wouldn't say control, but maybe just being able to manage quality and actually what schools are getting and value for money.
Was there any pushback initially from schools?
I think there would have been, not necessarily from my side directly, but it's always hard, isn't it? I'm sure. I mean, having not worked in education, I didn't really understand the politics of it, of a head teacher managing their own school, their own budgets, etc. To all of a sudden now coming into a trust, and an element of that is removed from them, isn't it? Because it's managed centrally. But ultimately, we are a trust that looks after each other. We have 30 schools, and we all help each other out, and we definitely have that now, with schools supporting each other, even from our site staff. They don't work in silos anymore. They all help each other out. So if someone's got a problem, there'll always be someone else now to help out. And so I think that is a huge benefit of being in like a family of schools, as opposed to being standalone and managing on your own. There is definitely support there from a raft of people with experience.
Yeah. Just on that story then, you joined, you got 9 schools to look after. Mm-hmm. Was there any training given when you joined? Any training on how to manage schools? Or were you just thrown in? The feedback I get is you are just thrown in.
You have to hit the ground running.
It's sink or swim time, literally.
It really is. So, I mean, I started off, and I think in hindsight, if I'd have known about the Good Estate Management Guide for schools, so the GEMS guidance, so government guidance, I immersed myself in that to start with, but I didn't actually attend any actual training, if you like, and I think it would have been good to have done that in the first couple of weeks, so you're almost playing catch up. But no, otherwise it really is down to experience. A property is a property, a building is a building, so you're always just trying to manage that, but then taken into account, which has taken a little time to embed in myself, I guess, of actually education. It isn't just about just the building. There's a lot of disruption to students, to staff, and the works that we do has to be factored around, that it still has to be operational and, not impact what's going on in there. But then even with history of work that I've done in the past, I've worked in historic buildings or, Woburn Abbey, for example. If you'd done work in Woburn Abbey, you couldn't shut it all down. You had to try and work around it, keeping sections open. So it's just applying the same theory, I guess, from past experience into the schools.
Yeah, it is something that I've spoke about previously with others, and they jump in and they're like, right, now what? Now you've just got to kind of knock on doors of these schools and go, I'm the new head of the state.
So it is all intros, isn't it? Yeah, this is who I am. It's almost, what do you need from me? While I'm trying to desperately put in some, some processes and procedures in the background to help me, make sure that I can demonstrate, are we being compliant? So it's assessing, are schools compliant? Where are the gaps? What do we do to start with? You're just trying to prioritise. Where do you start? Because everything just comes at you at once, honestly does.
I know. Well, you can imagine. And the trust are quite supportive then, I'm guessing.
They're very supportive, yeah. So I think we're quite forward in the way that, for example, we've had all surveys done at all of our schools for our forward maintenance register. So not all trusts have done that. They won't invest the money to do that. And without that information, I mean, I've said it many times before, but without all of that stock information, it is really hard. So saying I'm 3.5 years in, I now have all of that information. If I'd have had that on day one, we'd be in a very different position, but we are where we are. But sometimes, even for myself, it took a little bit of time to think, actually, I don't know enough about these schools.
Yeah.
Just
talk to me a little bit about that, just so we can get that across. Because we have so many estate managers doing different things, different strategies. Those holding on to the funds, being like, we need these funds because if a window breaks, we need it to fix the window. If the roof goes, we need to fix the window. But there's this also other estate managers where they're going, outlay £100,000 to get X data so we can spend 700 and save 100.
Yeah.
That shift then, how long did it take you to actually realise that was the right way of going about it?
Very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, within the first month or two of being there, I know I didn't have enough information on our schools to be able to do anything with that knee-jerk reaction. So what you want to try and reduce is that reactive spend. But obviously we're taking in schools that we don't know the history of. So as much as you can do, we've done our due diligence surveys to start with. There's always things that come up. And then when you've got 9 and then you've got 30, it's like, how do you prioritise? Because if you ask any school, I don't know, decoration, windows, whichever it is, they'll all say that theirs is the worst. Yeah. And they could be really bad, but actually, school down the road is even worse than yours. So I try to look at it of thinking about what information do I need to make sure that school doesn't close, to be able to do that. But having all the information, if I'd had it on day one, it would have been great. But I've got it all now. It's not a cheap thing to do. And I think you have to do a couple to realise the value of what information you get and how that changes the way that you prioritise works and how you can plan your capital spend, because we don't have an infinite pot of money. Yeah. And things do come up. And if we've got roof repairs, obviously, some mats, depending on the size of them, one roofing project could blow their whole capital budget. So it's like, how do you try and do that? So then can we phase works? So getting that information as early as possible is key. So if I'd have had it in the first couple of months, that would have been ideal. But so I'm 3.5 years in, I've had it all now probably for about 6 months. I've had all of that information for every school, but it doesn't just stop at that point. I can't just say, well, I've got it all and that's it done. It has to be reviewed again, so we've got a 5-year forward maintenance register. So, again, in 3, 4, 5 years, we'll be planning again and perhaps do it in phases then, rather than all in one hit, because that's quite a big expense of doing them all together. Yeah,
it is. It's tricky. It's a tricky balance. I did it, in one of the other podcasts again, just finding that balance between reactive and planned maintenance. Yeah. And it's very tricky to give, a definite answer. Just on the schools adding then, you say you started with 9.
Yeah.
What's that process look like for a new school coming on? And are you part of that process?
100% part of that process, yeah. So really every head of department is part of that process. So whether it's on the curriculum, whether it's on the finance, whether it's on on estates. We're all involved. And so we go through a process of due diligence. So literally just, checking back and ultimately identifying the gaps and seeing where the risk areas are and where we need to focus. And in some cases, pushing back to the diocese and saying, this has been, from my side, this roof has been needed to be done for the last 10 years and it's not been done, and pushing back to say we need funding towards that. I mean, whether you got it or not was another matter, but at least we had that information there of saying, this needs to be planned for, and until we had all of that stock information, just understanding the process.
So once one school comes on, how quickly before this, because you've gone from 9 to how many? 30 in what, 3 years?
No, so that was all within, I think, the first year.
So that's huge.
It was massive, yeah.
And how many's in your team?
Me, estates manager, and then Martin, my assistant estates
manager.
manager.
About Martin. Yeah, you mentioned Martin a few times. We need a shout out for Martin.
We do 100% need a shout out for Martin. I'd be lost without him. So, I mean, Martin's been, I think, maybe 2 years, I think he's been with me now. So I was on my own for a long time. So as much as you want to do strategic, direction in the estates, I was very operational focused because there's only one of me, so there's only so much you can do. But Martin started off as a site manager actually at one of the schools, and I must say, I keep an eye on him. And saying when the role came up, he applied for it, and he is an absolute star, and I would be lost without him.
I love that. So there's you, Martin, and you go from 9 to 30 schools in it's rapid. Yeah, it's a huge amount of responsibility. Mm-hmm. How do you handle that? Like that? How just talk us through that process of there's a lot more, mouths to feed all of a sudden. Yes, the pot of money gets bigger, but it doesn't feel like it gets big enough for the amount of stock. I think that's
and it's the unknowns as well, isn't it? It's saying as much due diligence as you do, that, there are a lot of
what's
unknowns.
In the walls, what's in the roof.
Exactly, and the things that happen. And school information varied from one to another, about the records that they had, for repairs that were done and things like that. But the main priority really is just ensuring compliance. Statutory compliance is the first thing. So making sure, our fire alarms are fine, our entries, so anything that I walked around with, so with my building hat on, if you like, field surveyor hat on, we could pick up the obvious things, but saying it tends to be then the big hitters like the heating failing and things like that are the things that really do catch you out. But the process is quite hard with a new school coming in, 30 in, and I was on my own then. I didn't have Martin at that point when we had the 30, and you do feel like you are drowning. There's no two ways about it. I mean, the hours that I used to put in are unreal, and I won't be alone in that. I'm sure with estate managers, of many schools across the trust, and we probably are under-resourced in our departments for what we do. But we're really not income generating, are we? I guess so. I don't know, but I think it is hard. So I'm saying, I know I used to work, silly hours, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night just to keep my head above water. It comes to a point you can't sustain that, can you? And then obviously I have Martin. So now between the two of us, we're split. Martin really is on the operational side of things, and I'm more of the strategic side. But we do have a heavy crossover around that.
2 people running 30 schools is quite heavy. Yeah. Is that just down to the trust kind of thinking that you've got it under control, or you don't have to call them out, don't worry. But, surely, my opinion, I see multi-academy trusts with 22, 25 schools, and they've got 4 teams. There's you with 30, and there's you and Martin. It just sounds a bit like, what's happening there, do you feel? And should there be, could there be more support to build a proper estates team? So
I do think we need additional support, but what we've done though is lent on consultants. Yep. So it's paying for them, I guess, isn't it? It's like anything; it all comes down to trying to balance the books. So we lean heavily on consultants, and then obviously you've got no long-term commitment. I guess you just use them for the work that you need, and they're invaluable for us, whether that's running a project, so I had works over the summer, and we had a few of those run by consultants for us, or even just gathering information. it's very difficult because there's trusts of similar size that do have bigger teams. But then, we have an outsourced health and safety contract, so some MATs will have an in-house safety team. I don't know that I would want that responsibility. I think that's a big risk of managing that in-house. So there's swings and roundabouts, I think. As long as you outsource, and you've got a good contract with those things like health and safety side, then we get by, and there are times when we really do feel the pinch. And I think it's just about being honest to our managers about what our workload is and actually where priorities sit now. Would I like extra staff? Of course, we're all gonna say that. But I think it's about managing what we've got, the time that we've got, prioritising the best we can, and leaning on third-party consultants where we need to. For those elements of work that we can just know I can't put the time in to be able to do it properly. Yeah,
no, it's good. Not calling out the trust at all. It's great. You guys are amazing. You've got a great team and things. But I think it's just trying to understand why some multi-academy trusts have got 11 and you've got full teams, and then there's you up at 30 with. Well,
I think there are there are some trusts that I think are over. You see the structure in the estates team, and you think, why do you need so
it's bigger than a
many
consultancy?
Oh, you don't, and you think how busy are they all of the time? And for us, we've also got site staff. Now, I don't manage; they don't report to me. Caretakers report to into the schools, into the head teachers. That is something I'd like to bring centrally. There's lots of things I've spoken to, our CEO about what the forward planning of the trust. But I think, the support and the work that they do can't be underestimated either, of leaning on them and almost trying to upskill them so that then they don't rely on us so much for things as well. So I think we have to look at it on the wider team as well. There are other people that are involved. So as much as Martin goes around and he'll check the schools, so the site staff know they've got people to come to, we also need to push back a little bit and say, that this responsibility lies with you. We'll give you the tools, we'll support you as much as we can, but we can't do your job for you. So,
one of the questions that we always like to fight is, what was one of the biggest challenges that you ever faced? And I'm going to probably pick for you only because people are interested in RAC, and you, unfortunately, got hit with it quite heavy. Just talk to us about that process from day one. What did that look like with the call coming in and you thinking, well, what is going on?
Well, so we were a bit ahead of the game actually with assessing schools and understanding which schools had RAC. So I arranged for surveys on all of our schools, and that included schools. So everyone was done, and we've got a couple of schools that really shouldn't have been affected. Well, one of them was, so it didn't meet the criteria of the timing, of the age, etc. But one of our schools did, and that's because, unbeknown to me, so I'm just looking at the school has got 4 blocks, and only one of them was renewed completely. So it was a new build 10, 12 years ago. So I'm thinking it doesn't come under it. But the other 3 blocks were only refurbished, and the RAC was left in place. So that's
interesting,
massive. Okay. So that was a huge hit. And then we've got 2, so that's a secondary school, and we've got 2 primary schools that are affected. We've had huge support from the DFE around it, and we've got works at the moment going on. So we've done some remedial works, some propping works in 2 of our schools, and in the secondary school we're actually removing. We've removed the RAC, and we've got huge roofing projects going on right now. But that was a major challenge, and it's a real curveball in everything that's going on. It's so busy, and then all of a sudden, RAC comes up, and you're thinking, we're fine, I'm sure it's going to be fine. On the face of it, we shouldn't have any. And then we've got 2 primaries, okay, we can deal with those. And then we get hit with this secondary school, and the impact of the schools is massive. So, so students, put into other learning areas, so they've used other schools, so we had to double up on schools, had to hire out campus, for other students to go, exam times, so much upheaval for everybody with that. But RAC has been a huge challenge, but it's also been a great learning curve as well, about test your resilience for sure. And I'm sure, head teachers and school staff and students have all been tested on, actually we can get through things with a bit of planning, talking to each other and working things through, and working closely with the DFE. We've been really lucky with who we've got, in the DFE. I'll give a shout out to Grace in there, who's been hugely supportive for us in our schools, and great contractors, that we're working with as well. But RAC has been a challenge I didn't foresee.
I was really keen to just bring it up because I know you were affected by it, and it didn't affect a lot of trusts, but those that did, if you actually look at the numbers that were found compared to how many trusts there are, it was minimal. But those that it hit really hard. And from memory, didn't they renounce, within like a week before school start term? Schools need to shut, and everyone's like complete meltdown. So
originally it was you've identified you've got RAC, so it was almost sort of what remediation are you going to do, and we're going to manage around it, and prop or whatever we're going to do, whatever works, we're going to be done. But schools could remain open. So we'd started on the two primaries with some propping works, and then it's fine. It's only this area that will be closed, and we'll if we need to put temporary accommodation there, we will, or, we'll facilitate learning around it. And then, within a week, that changed to they're all closing. I'm like, oh my gosh. So the week before, which I have to say is really unfortunate. And I have to give a shout out to Martin, because at that time I went and had back surgery. So I actually...
Oh, was that when that happened? I was when...
So wow. I was off then. So, I was in a pretty bad way myself. So poor Martin ended up having to really carry the can for that at the start of term. Schools going in, not knowing where they're going. Head teachers were phenomenal at the schools and so resilient. Setting up new places to learn. And I guess our students, it just shows the resilience of students, staff alike, across to try and cope with that. But the two primaries, they're back in there, and the secondary affected, one block is complete. We've got two blocks still being worked on.
Just talk to me about how you knew of that data. Obviously, the announcement came out. Mm-hmm. Were you aware RAC was in the building before the announcement, or was it a case of we might have RAC, we need to get it checked?
So, you look first of all at the age of the building, of where it is, and the likelihood of it. But to be honest, prior to that, and call me ignorant maybe, I didn't even give it a second thought, really. It wasn't anything much. And when you're looking at our stock, you're thinking, well, that school will be okay, that'll be okay. So it was a bit of a shock, and I think we've all learned a lot about RAC in general. But it's so from a learning point, I know I've learned a lot. Martin has definitely been a huge upheaval for schools. I think the information that came out initially could have been better for us to be able to manage, the schools generally. But had I been heard of it, or dealt with it in previous buildings? No. Yeah. But I'm saying there was a lot. I think there was others that were affected more than us. In fact, the two schools that have reopened, the two primary schools, they're now actually on the school rebuilding programme because of the significance. And I think, first of all, it's like, it's only going to be a little bit. It's here or there. And then, of course, consultants even of getting them out, because all of a sudden it's like everybody wants to check their schools. The timescales of waiting was actually quite significant, and I'm sure they probably made a pretty penny, isn't it? Supply and demand of
absolutely.
of that, it was a big hit. So practically all your projects, everything you're working on is almost shelved while we're looking, at the RAC situation.
With you, with the way that you're set up and how much data you have and how proactive you are as a trust getting the information, it does worry you how many schools are still left out there with RAC in that's not been checked on. Nobody knows because they just haven't had the proper test done, or they've not had a quick visual round.
And it's the competence of the person who's checking, isn't it, as well? So as much as I could look at history and I could speak to the site staff who've been there for years and just have a visual and think, no, I think it's okay. We appointed professionals to do the surveys on them and just make sure that was there any there? If there was, what condition was it in? There was no way we were going to take any risks of saying, no, it's fine. We know the age of it doesn't count. Yeah. It won't be in the parameters, because ultimately we have got a school that we didn't think would count, but has 3 blocks affected. So you just don't know.
Yeah, I appreciate you talking about that because it was a tough time, and the fact that it was just you and Martin. I really want to emphasise that there's no team here.
No.
You and Martin with all these schools and RAC.
Yeah.
So we get through RAC, and then all of a sudden it's like, right, sustainability now. We need sustainable buildings.
Yeah.
It feels like a never-ending cycle, doesn't it? Of knocking you down with a hammer, going, we need more. So with obviously sustainability in construction in general is, it's on everyone's agenda. What can we do to have, sustainable buildings? And schools is no exception. You've been tasked with sustainability managers, I believe, that you need for 2025.
So yes, the Green Climate Action Plan,
okay.
And a sustainability lead for that. I mean, I will say I think the information being given out for that and the promise of documents and guidance and stuff, there is a set amount. I don't think it's forthcoming considering how close we are to have this Green Climate Action Plan in place, and I'm sure, we won't be the only ones who aren't ahead of it. I mean, we're on it and we're looking at it and stuff. But I think the information that's been promised, and if you look on the portals and say this is coming, I don't think it's been particularly helpful. I mean, I've had decarbonisation reports. I've got them for across the school, so we're quite lucky in some way that I'm ahead of the game in terms of the information I have for our schools. Whether we're ahead of actually carrying out works, that ultimately comes to costs, doesn't it, and budget and what we can prioritise for. But I'd already done the sort of the decarb reports before that, so it feeds in. But even the plan itself, it isn't even just on the building. For our Green Climate Action Plan, it affects all sorts. Whether that's around learning, it isn't just about keeping our buildings in that way. So it's a massive piece of work. And while you're expected to have a sustainability lead, I guarantee that most trusts aren't going to appoint a new person in on that role. It's going to be somebody's add-on to do, isn't it? And how many of us have that's our area of expertise with sustainability? We all have a knowledge of lots of areas, don't we? It's, as estate managers, estate leads, you have a snippet of knowledge. We have most experience in one, and then add-ons on for the others. So really, we'd like to think we'll appoint a sustainability lead because this is huge. But like most trusts, we probably couldn't afford to. So ultimately it becomes a bolt-on to somebody else's job. And then again, I guess we'll probably lean on consultants to try and support through until we really know what's actually happening. But I think the information given out so far is pretty vague. So we're on it. Are we ahead of it? No. Are we sort of where we should be? Maybe just about. Yeah, it's a massive piece of work, an absolutely huge piece of work.
To be fair, the response is same, I think, across. You're definitely not on your own in this situation. I think a lot of people are reading it thinking, what's it mean? I think literally overnight, they want you to have, wind turbines on, solar panels on, insulation this thick, and they just want you to have a perfect building. Yeah. And they've basically said, right, you've got 12 months sort out.
But where's the funding for it?
Yeah. We can't even afford to put a roof on some schools.
No, exactly that. Yeah,
like you said, one roof.
Yeah, it could take someone's whole budget out.
Whole budget.
Yeah.
And
it is really hard.
But then on the back of that, they're saying, well, you need to add this and this and this and this. And it's like, well, it's really, really tricky.
Yeah.
It is tough. I think my naivety to it was quite incredible coming in. Obviously, me through the world of roofing. Yeah. I came in and I'd go out there and I'd survey a building for somebody, and I'm like, right, you need a new roof. Like, genuinely though, you need a new roof. Like, I'm not lying. You've got insulation about 10 mil thick. It's soaking wet through, and it's going to cost you £400,000.
Yeah.
And you go, I've got £500,000 in the entire budget for 10 schools.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but you need a new roof. And, just through that kind of experience of speaking to state managers and things, really understanding it's really tricky.
You've got to be a little bit innovative.
You've got to be really innovative. Yeah, very. And then, the question I always ask on here, what's the biggest challenge? And I don't even think I have to.
Do you know what, though? I mean, RAC's a challenge. Just maintaining the estate, a challenge. Keeping your information up to date is a challenge. And you're dealing with, we've got a couple of schools that are sort of, 10, 12 years old, that even they have got their own challenges in the fact that, it's almost like everything's failing at once, because, it's just managing that. So it is, and I mean, I always feed back to it that information is key, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? There's very little you can do, but ultimately, you could have 4 schools shouting for the same and they could all be in horrendous position, but someone is going to be much, much worse than the other ones, and you just feel very bad. But then I guess if they weren't part of a trust, then they'd be going through a bidding route and then maybe wouldn't get things done either. So, but it is really hard managing with limited resources and an ageing estate, like you say.
It's having a set strategy, isn't it? That everyone's on board and everyone's pulling in the same direction. And that's you as the lead to make sure that mission is, and everyone's on with you. Yeah,
and I think it's having a criteria. So I have, I use the GEMS, the guidance, and I have set criteria and I score it and it comes out with a rating at the end, to try and show that we're not just going, everything's going to go in that school this year, that we've got a 5-year plan and we know that there's things that maybe will be unforeseen. But we have that information now that we can plan and say, I know you're not getting anything this year, but look, in year 2, 3 or 4, you're going to have that, and just hope that people understand. And schools, I think, are understanding that we don't have an infinite pot of money and that we've tried to do it the best. They're saying that all we can do is get that asset information and try and plan the best we can in priority need. And ultimately the aim is to keep our schools open. So anything that risks our schools from closing, obviously, takes a priority with their health and safety side of things. The nice to haves, unfortunately, they drop down, don't they?
They do. Just with you working in an education establishment, we've got to ask everybody, because that's what this podcast is for. Do you have an opinion on the education system and the topics that we learn? And would you change it?
Oh, gosh. Now, that's really hard, as in my children are all very... I'm now on the grandchildren, so... I don't know. Do you know what? I think it's hard. I mean, my grandchildren, so my eldest one is 13 and my youngest is 3. So I have 5 grandchildren. I know I don't look old enough. So, and I think from their schooling and the pressure that is put on them at such an early age, with exams and continual assessments and things, I don't know how much I agree with that. I know it's nice to have assessment, but I think not everyone copes well with that. So I think it should be more about maybe not just the written, but there should be, and I'm sure there are other ways of assessing, and perhaps it does go on. I'm not in the school sector as such as it is, but in terms of like the whole education and the learning that the children do, I think, where I used to live, actually, we had a lower, middle and upper school, and I actually quite like that set up, because when you're in upper, it's like, right, you're proper heads down now, because you're doing all your exams and all the rest of it, and you don't get that other noise. But I don't know. But other than that, no, I'm going to let you down here. I'm not really got a huge opinion because I'm not in.
It's fine. It's absolutely fine. No, it's just sometimes, we get very opinionated people say, I want to change this and we'll change this. No. And I think that
only the funding for the education, that's the only thing. I would do. Yeah, just to be able to have that. And I guess, if you look at special education needs and the support around that, and there's much more, isn't there, in schools? I know when I go to schools and, that support, and staff are having to say they can't afford this many teachers because they've got children perhaps that need more one-to-one, and that's obviously where focus has to be, and then others lose out. And I think schools don't have the funding perhaps to be able to get the right, the number of staff in place. So perhaps that would be my only thing around
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that. It's not too controversial. It's just nice. It's nice. It's a nice thing. But finally, just any advice for people that are coming into your type of role, that are stepping in and, you see a lot of caretakers that all of a sudden just become promoted to head of estates, or people that are actually stepping out of a surveying role or getting into estates. What advice would you give? If you could start again, and you're coming in day one, what would you do?
So day one, I wish I'd have done the actual GEMS online, proper face-to-face training before I started. So I had a real understanding of how that started. But I think, sorry, ask me the question again.
So if you had to give any advice,
okay.
Any advice, day one,
yeah,
and you've just come in and you're looking after, we'll say 9 schools. In fact, You're going back to day one again.
Day one in 9 schools. So information. So day one, I would want full surveys, M&E, fabric, done from day one. Full forward maintenance registers, FMRs, for all of those schools to really get a good handle on what our priorities are. I do feel that because I didn't have all of that information to start, it was good information, but not as thorough as I've got now, that you almost do backtrack a little on things. And I think you could plan things better if you had that information and the priority wise. So I think even it's almost like saying, we're only going to do emergency works. That's all I can manage to do of project manager. I'm going to, outsource that for somebody else to manage for us for a period of time while I get a grips with just really what the estate looks like and what the main risks are and what the main concerns are and the priorities. And I think even the first 6 months spent looking at that would be invaluable moving forward, rather than getting things in place and then playing catch up. And then the other thing obviously is process and procedure, and making sure, you've got that aligned. Everyone knows what they're working to and what's acceptable and what isn't. And growing a good network of people to support you. You can't do it on your own. You can't do it on your own. Yeah. And use the people outside. I say all the time about our site staff are invaluable with the information that they hold and the way they support. And you need them on board. So engage with all. Don't think you can do it on your own. You really can't. You need that support. But information is key.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Well, look, Tracey, we're going to sign off.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
See you soon. Thanks for watching the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you'd love to be a guest on here, please drop me an email at dn@charlesgarth.com. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.